to be our first official
the
podcast of Hernando this week, and it's been a busy week. Full transparency, Nick's my son, and we're going to get in a little bit of the planning and zoning. And want to go over that a little bit. You know, I did do I put out a post, and you know me, I don't post anything, don't do social media, don't do any of that stuff. But trying to prep for this, you know, and try to get a feel for what's really going on, and not just my perception, but, you know, what the citizens are looking at and everything else. I put out a post on several different group sites, you know, and naturally you assume that you're going to get certain feedback from different groups and stuff like that. And it was really interesting because there wasn't a whole lot of huge negative comments coming back. You know, usually you put something out, and you know, I broad spectrum it a little bit, and just asking, you know, what their first thought of Hernando County was, and you know, what came to mind first, and some other ones just to, you know, if they voted or if they didn't vote, a specific reason why they didn't vote, just trying to figure out, you know, the voter turnout and stuff like that, and then what comes to mind to them for the most major issue in Hernando County, right? So there's a couple of questions there that I just put out and put on a couple different groups, and I think I actually got kicked off one group because there were so many comments, and they're like, "This isn't a political site." I'm like, "This isn't political stuff. This is, you know, resident stuff." But whatever. But for the most part, it was fairly consistent, you know. And I put it on more of a Republican leaning site, and I put it on just an open forum, and I put it on one that you would think is more of a left leaning site. And it was fairly consistent across the board. I mean, you weed out the
crazies.
Yeah. You weed those out a little bit, but for the most part, what came up was the biggest concern that it seemed like everybody had, no matter what political party affiliation they were with, was the growth in the county. You know, and everybody is, you know, there's too much growth, and it's overwhelmed with people, and you know, that seems to be the overbearing thing, is everybody is concerned about the growth and the infrastructure of the county.
Right, absolutely.
So with that being said, it makes sense. You know, originally we talked about, I want to go through, you know, all the county commissioners and the administrators, and then get into the government officials. But being my son, and you know, we're doing this, and I wanted to make sure I was fully transparent, saying, you know, you are my son, but you do hold some committees and on some stuff. And I didn't want that in the back of anybody's mind that, oh, well, he's not even interviewing the guy that is, you know, involved in the biggest issue that the county sees that they have right now. So I figured we'll just get that right off the table, you know, so it's not in the back of anybody's mind, and be fully transparent with it. With that being said, you know, how did you get into, not necessarily politics in general, but I guess, number one, what is the position that you hold that's in regard to the planning portion of the county? And then how did you get into that role? And what was your motivation to get into that role?
Yeah. So I'm currently the chairman of the Planning and Zoning Commission. To back up even a little bit further than that, the Planning and Zoning Commission is a 5-person volunteer board.
Right, we'll get on all that. Yeah, absolutely.
So we're all appointed by certain county commissioners for that role. But so right now I'm sitting as the chair. Chair rotates, and it's basically the board selects who they want to be the chair for the year. So I did
And that's the board that makes up the Planning and Zoning Commission, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, so the Planning and Zoning Commission itself chooses its own chairman.
Right.
So we're all citizens in some type of background, you know, like right now we've got, you know, myself who's on planning and zoning, you know, I've got a drafting company, been in construction, you know, surrounded by construction for obviously most of my life.
Right.
We've got someone who is a business owner out in Hernando Beach. We've got someone who owns a foundation stabilization company who sits on that board. We've got a retired a retiree sitting on the board as more of a citizen role. But it's made to go ahead and put people in that have kind of differing opinions on different areas, and it's by design. The county commission kind of did that on purpose. So the planning and zoning commission is more of the legislative side of zoning.
Okay.
So the thing that a lot of people don't understand is that there's only certain things that you can actually go ahead and deny and approve for. So we've got to follow kind of the ordinances and the guidelines that the county commission has already set in place. And then we don't get to really change those rules.
Right. We're going to dive into that a little bit
Right.
more deeply, but I mean, on the front side of it, though, so you were kind of appointed or asked to join it by a county commissioner or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, so I knew that I wanted to get on it because I knew that was a big issue for me.
Right.
You know,
Just trying to do permits and everything else and building in the county and
yeah.
whatnot.
So surprisingly, hopping on that board just because I always try to be above board on everything, right? We started doing less work in Hernando County when I got on that board because I didn't want to go ahead and have any
conflicts,
possibility conflict. You know, our drafting company, we worked in 47 of the 67 counties last year. I've dealt with municipalities all over the state of Florida. I know how development works. I know how that kind of stuff keeps on moving.
Having that background, you kind of know how the counties differ in their policies and procedures and what they approve and how they approve and everything else. That's a lot of good information.
We're surprisingly a lot more stringent than people realize.
Right.
But yeah, so I wanted to get involved in that. There wasn't a position available immediately, so I actually sat on the construction regulation board first.
Okay.
I was on that for 7 or 8 months.
And what was the primary function of that board? What's is that
the construction regulation board?
Is that regulating contractors that are licensed in the county?
That's issues with contractor licensing. That's revocation of agricultural permits when you start finding out that people are actually building, full residential structures instead of, that type of stuff. But the building department during that period of time was going through kind of a restructuring. That board doesn't meet on a regular basis. That board meets when there's a need for that board to meet.
Gotcha.
Right.
Gotcha.
So you can be appointed to that board, but unless there's a call for that, they don't actually ever meet. Right. So,
yeah, it's more of a reactionary board that hey, if there's an issue, we're gonna meet, and we're gonna discuss it and figure it out.
Exactly. So. It didn't have the level of involvement that I really was looking forward to, and trying to get involved on that side of things. So when there was an opening on the Planning and Zoning Commission, I actually went ahead and hopped into that and wanted to get going for that. So, and that was back when I believe that was right after Commissioner Campbell became a county commissioner.
Okay.
And there was a vacancy on the board because he was
on that board and he moved.
He was the planning and zoning board, and then he moved to county commission.
Gotcha.
When he won his election. So, yeah, I was very involved in that point in time, and when the opening came up, I went ahead and hopped in.
So that's kind of the progression how you got on that board then. So, just to reiterate, so that's kind of you're suggested by a county commissioner to be on that board. It's a voluntary position, non-paid. Just hey, we're gonna have a group of citizens that understand.
Yeah. So the positions are publicly advertised.
Right.
Okay. So whenever a position opens, they post about it. They go ahead and announce the position. Anybody can put an application in, and then each commissioner is allotted one of the spots.
Okay.
So
out of all the applicants, each commissioner will say, hey, I'd like this guy for this position.
Right.
Gotcha.
Yep. So, and then if I were to fall off, the person who selected me, who was Commissioner Campbell, would get to choose my replacement.
Okay.
The rest of the board doesn't have a say.
Gotcha.
So it's designed to go ahead and try to keep things a little bit more even and not necessarily just, the board group think,
right.
aggregate that way.
So being appointed or not appointed but suggested by a county commissioner, the fact that it's a non-paid position, it's voluntary, there's not a whole lot of drive for any collusion there or anything like that. It's just, hey, we think this guy's got the best qualifications, and
Exactly.
everybody in the county is allowed to submit their application to do that.
Yep.
The commissioner decides through all the applications. I think this guy's most qualified to do that, basically,
Yep.
right?
That's it.
So, as we go forward, you get on this board. I guess before we get into the purpose of that board and what it actually does, what was your biggest surprise once you got on it?
I'm a little different than probably the average citizen coming into that, right? So I paid a lot more attention to those things. I kind of had an idea what to expect already coming in. What I will say from some of the other members that I know that have come on and stepped in and actually started that type of stuff is they don't realize how little flexibility they actually have in the decision making.
And that's a little what we talked about last time was, the education of, hey, what is this position really going to entail, and
Right.
what am I allowed to do and what I can't do, right?
Yep. Yeah. So, and whenever you want to get into how that board operates, we can do that. But there's a pretty strict set of guidelines that you have to follow as to does it check all these boxes?
Right.
Does it make sense? Really, the only reason for having the board is it's kind of a step outside of strictly administrative, right? So, if it was strictly going down a checklist and it checks this box, it checks this box, it checks this box, you could probably just have a staff member go ahead and say, hey,
Right.
meets all the conditions.
I mean, at
passed.
this point, you can have AI do it.
Right.
Yeah.
We get to the point of does it fit the community?
Right.
So that's what our decision making really comes down to almost every time. Is this something that's going to harm the community around it?
Right.
But at the end of the day, we try to preserve property rights. We try to preserve, the communities that people buy into, expectations for that type of thing. But at the end of the day, you're following the comp plan and what the elected officials have laid out for you.
Right. And we'll get into that, the whole comp side of it in a little while too. But so that's kind of the structure, how you got involved with it, the outline of it a little bit. But I mean, across the state, is this kind of the same structure that most counties have? Is we've got a voluntary board of people that are on this planning and zoning board, and it's a voluntary position? I mean, is that how it's done across the state?
It's definitely not uniform.
Okay.
There are certain counties that have opted, instead of having a board of citizens going ahead and making the decisions, they have what's called a special magistrate, which is basically a judge.
Right.
And that comes down to one person's interpretation of the law.
Right.
They don't really consider community at that point at all, right? That is more of the administrative position, but we also have that as far as an appeals process. We just don't do that for all of the actual applications that come forward.
So is there anybody on staff that oversees your board other than the county commissioners, but is there anybody on staff that oversees your board or is more of a legislative side of it? I mean, I've looked into some stuff with other counties, and Hillsborough County was one that come to mind, and they hire a planning and zoning guy that drives all planning and zoning for thing. And
yes, that's Omer DePablo.
So what is that called here?
Planning and zoning. He's just the department head.
So there's a planning and zoning department head. So you guys are on the board to suggest it, and then there's a whole planning and zoning team that does.
So when an application gets submitted, okay, say you're, Joe homeowner, you want to change the zoning of your property because you want to put, XYZ on the property.
Right.
You submit that application to the planning department.
Okay.
Okay, that planning department has staff members on it. It's got people that are involved in, actually kind of submitting recommendations to the commission, to the county commission, to change ordinances and stuff like that, right? They work and make sure that the application gets filled out in its entirety, and then staff actually goes through and makes a recommendation to our board of approve or deny. So on every application, at the very top, we've got a brief narrative of what it is. You scroll down, you see what the financial impact, you see what the county engineer came back with as their stipulations, you see what the utility department came back on their stipulations, and then you get a staff recommendation at the end.
So let me ask you, I mean, what's that hierarchy look like? I mean, and forgive me, I forgot his last name, but Mr. Homer, he's a kind of the head of that whole department that puts all that together, correct?
Omar DePablo.
Omar DePablo.
DePablo.
DePablo. Okay.
Yep.
Gotcha.
Omar DePablo.
Gotcha. So is he the one that then, kind of collects all that data, everything, and sends it to you guys? Say, hey, this is our recommendations.
So they put it on an agenda and they publish it to the public 10 days before the meeting.
Okay.
They're also the ones that are required to do all the actual notice to neighbors, and make sure that there's a lot of laws that go into most of this kind of stuff about changes.
Yeah, and I've done that before where, I mean, you've got to pass it out to everybody within, I think it's 250 feet of 500 feet of that specific property.
So basically that property outline, a 500-foot, not necessarily radius because you got weird shapes all the time, but like a 500-foot offset from that property line. Any property that touches inside that 500 foot gets a notice.
Right.
Okay. There also has to be posted signs.
Those are the yellow signs we see as we drive. Yeah.
And there's something that we can bring up too is the difference between the yellow and the blue signs because people don't understand that at all. But yes, the yellow signs are for our Planning and Zoning Commission. They have to be publicly posted in a conspicuous place so that people can go ahead and see it as they're passing by. There's a notice that goes out in the form of a letter to all the people within 500 feet. There's a notice that's put in the paper. And then there's also the publicly posted agenda 10 days before the meeting.
Gotcha.
Yep. So what we end up getting
and that agenda is posted where? I'm sorry.
It's on the county website.
The county website.
Yep. So the county uses a platform.
Is that the OpenGov or is that something totally different?
Nope, something totally different.
Okay.
OpenGov's for procurement.
Gotcha.
The county uses a platform by a company called Granicus. The platform itself is called Legistar.
Okay.
That's where all of the public meetings are posted.
Gotcha.
Okay. That's also where you can always go back and watch the video of the actual meetings.
Okay.
So the Planning and Zoning Commission is still held to the same standards that the Board of County Commission is as far as sunshine law.
Yeah, so it's got to be recorded and
everything's got to be in
open
the public.
To the public.
It's got to be done there. I can't call other commissioners that are sitting on my board and say, "Hey, what do you think about this one?" Before the meeting. Everything has to happen in that meeting.
So like we talked about with the county commissioners, you guys are making decisions on the fly there. I mean, that's the first time you guys have collectively had a discussion about it.
Yeah, that's why, most of our meetings, it starts at 9. We're normally done 3 o'clock.
Gotcha.
2 o'clock. That's to review like 11 items.
Really? Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So, there's a good amount of discussion, and it also gives the community a platform to come out and speak against or for things.
Yeah, and I've watched some of those as well. Yeah.
So we all follow the same Robert's Rule that the County Commission does. Loosely follows Robert's Rule because we're not in a judicial setting.
Right.
It's all legislative. But yeah, we get the agendas and we get to review the information the same time the public gets it.
Okay. Wow. So they don't give you guys a pre-agenda so individually, so
Nope.
you guys can look at it and say, hey, form some kind of formulation of thought process before you get to that meeting.
That 10-day notice that they go ahead and give the public, they go ahead and send us an email and say the agenda has been posted online.
Okay.
And then that's when we can go ahead and actually hop on.
So you actually get it 10 days ahead of time.
You get a 10-day window.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm pretty good about going ahead and getting through and actually reviewing everything because as the chairman, I don't really get the same luxury that a lot of the other board members do of being able to just scroll through and read and catch up while we're doing all the introductions and stuff like that. I've got the meeting section to run, right? So I've got what I'm typically sitting up there with is I have a printed agenda, so I see everything that's coming up. And then I also have a laptop open that has the full agenda because our agendas are 200 to 300 pages long.
Right.
Where I can scroll through and go ahead and try to hit, different sections of the actual application. But typically I'm introducing Omar.
Well, you got to do all the procedural stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So while everyone else is kind of reading through and refreshing what they have, I need to make sure that before that meeting, I'm in it and I understand what all nuances are. Because we also, not to get too complicated with this, but we also have a section called the unified agenda. So we have a standard agenda and a unified agenda. Unified agenda we typically vote on as one entire block. Yes or no for the entire thing.
Is that like for simple things? Say, hey, if there's
special exception permits,
stuff you think will all pass or be negative all at one time, basically.
So what we do though is we have the ability to pull from that unified agenda and say, I want to hear that one individually.
Do you have the? I mean, obviously you guys have the ability, but like, is that put out to the citizens for objection? Say, hey, we're going to be unified agenda on all these things. Is there anybody here that objects for us?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So in that meeting, what I do is I explain what the unified agenda is to everyone in the room.
Right.
Then I go ahead and say, we're going to read these out one by one. Okay. When they read it out and introduce what it is, if you are here to speak for or against that item, please raise your hand.
Gotcha.
If I see any hands up, I make a note that, okay, that's one that we're going to pull.
Gotcha.
And then we go through the entire unified agenda. Unified agendas, it can be 2 items, it could be 8 items, it could be 12 items.
Right.
It's whatever just comes up that day. But if anybody's there to go ahead and speak about that, we want to give those people a chance to speak.
Perfect.
Typically, if they're to speak for it, we're going to tell you you probably don't even really need to do that.
Right.
It's the unified agenda is typically one of those things that we go through, and unless one of the board members pull it, chances are it's going to pass.
Right.
That's why they're all bunched together like that, is because they should be the easy approvals.
Gotcha.
But almost every single meeting we have at least 2 or 3 that we pull out of that unified agenda to speak about.
Okay.
A lot of what it is somebody wants to park an RV on their property during construction.
Okay.
It's a 6-month approval.
Right.
Up to a 2-year approval. But we typically do a 6-month approval on it.
Right.
Is there a reason that we shouldn't do stuff like that? Those are the easy things that you can typically go ahead and get through. It's not, big development or anything like that coming through. What we do put on the unified agenda a lot is what's called a conditional plat. In this process, okay, so after a rezoning for like a planned development, they go a little bit further down the process, and before they can actually go ahead and get their building permits, they have to go ahead and submit a conditional plat to the zoning department.
Right.
So basically, we've already approved the zoning change, and we already know that this is the type of houses that are going there. The conditional plat's finally presented back to us, and we're basically just approving that, okay, this matches what we originally said that we were approving.
Yeah, and we can get into that a little bit deeper as we get into this, because I know there's some stuff with conditional platting to where you had some developers that would get approval for it, and then they would never plat the thing out until it was too late, right?
Yep.
And there were some issues surrounding
It's not
the
really
way they were doing.
Issues.
Well, they wouldn't put the infrastructure in, so they would start selling lots without having them platted. Is my understanding. Not recently in Hernando County, but I think that's a little bit of what it was. So let me ask you. So we kind of got the basis of what that committee does, how people are appointed to that or set on those committees, how to get to that committee. Let me ask you this, because it's not an elected position. Is there a term? What
4 years.
So 4 years.
Yep.
So what's the recourse? Because right now, I mean, you've got a lot of experience in construction. I mean, I've been in construction all my life, and you've also been in it. So you've got a lot of experience, and you would hope that the commissioners are choosing people that have likewise experience. But what's the recourse if somebody's just not a good fit on that committee, or just not doing the right thing, or like you said, just showing up and not looking at the agenda before they get there, and just making bad judgment calls and stuff like that? I mean, because at that point, the citizens have no recourse to, hey, I'm not going to elect that guy again. How's that work?
And this is where I'm not 100% certain on the legal aspect of it, right? So I don't believe there is actually a ability for the commissioners to pull a seated member once they've been
really
appointed.
Okay, gotcha.
So, like, you would think the person that put me here can take me off.
You would think so, yeah.
I think,
and it's a volunteer position, so there's no contracts in place.
Right.
Yeah.
There's I want to say there's a legal precedent that you cannot remove that person once they're in.
Really?
Yeah.
Now, and I know it's kind of fuzzy and we're not exactly clear on it, but I mean, you think that's a state statute or is that a county statute?
No, it's a state.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah.
Even though all counties, well, not all counties, but some counties do this thing a little bit differently.
So what the state sets up for, though, is it gives you different avenues on how you're going to handle it.
So this is one avenue that we're taking.
Avenue. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yep.
That's interesting because at that point, hey, you're there, and then the only recourse would be we do elect the county commissioner. So if we're not happy with that, then we can voice our opinion to the county commissioner. And when the 4 years is up, he knows that, hey, this isn't working out. We need to pull this guy.
So this is where we need to talk about the process more. Okay. If I go ahead and approve something.
Oh, and we'll get into the process. Yeah,
well, I know, but here's why it doesn't matter as much as what I think you're probably getting at there. Okay. If you get somebody on there who's just a complete schmuck, doesn't know what they're doing, our decisions aren't ratified until the commission approves them anyway.
Right, but you still would hope that committee is efficient in doing their job to say, hey, we're putting together a package that we're going to submit to the commissioners, and they're going to sign off because we did not do anything erroneous that is just blatantly wrong.
Right.
You would think.
You'd think.
Okay. Well, and to be transparent, we've gone through this before, and I watched some stuff. It's been several months back to where, you guys are doing what you think you need to be doing. The county commission is overruling or taking a different side on it, and there's a conflict there that, look, we don't necessarily know what you guys are looking for. I mean, we're we know what we're supposed to be doing, but evidently what we're doing is not what you guys were thinking we're doing. And there's a conflict of, hey, are we on the same page or are we not on the same page? Well, and it gets back to, hey, we want this to be efficient.
We do, right? And that's we want efficiency in government. I don't want to sit there and volunteer 8 hours of my time every month just to go ahead and have all the stuff that I spent hours discussing overturned in a commission meeting that they also have to spend hours discussing, so.
And I think some of this is going to get back to when we get a little further into it. You guys have some guidelines and you got some basis of what you're making. I mean, you're not just arbitrarily making these decisions. I mean, there's a comp plan for the county.
It's all the stuff your elected officials pass.
Right.
So yeah, we've got to do whatever the ordinances and the comp plan and the future land use and all the things they have set up for us actually say, yes, you can do, or no, you cannot do. Right. Not only that, you've got the staff recommendation too, where the staff is the historical knowledge. Right. Like Omar has been there, I want to say he's been there for probably 16, 17 years. He's been there for a long time.
And Omar has a full comprehensive understanding of the long-term comp plan.
Not only that, he's got the education on how counties in general are supposed to be setting up planning.
Right, and I'm sure he has meetings like we talked about last time, where he goes and meets with other counties and say, hey, how are you handling this growth and how are you doing this, right?
Well, great part to that. I mean, tiny homes are a perfect example.
Right.
So he's been putting together the tiny home zoning ordinances and trying to get something put together for the county commission to review and actually approve. He's been dealing with zoning communities out in Colorado and other states to figure out how they set up tiny home communities.
Right.
So yeah, he does a great job.
Yeah. So getting into it, you guys are making decisions based on comp plan, things that are laid out that you're going with. I think for most citizens, and we'll start getting in kind of the nuts and bolts of it a little bit now, I think for most citizens where they struggle seeing some of this stuff on not necessarily the growth, but approvals of certain things where we're changing it outside of a comp plan. So when somebody comes in and they want to change zoning, so we've got a comp plan that says, hey, this piece of property parcel is zoned this one is zoned this. I think where some of the citizens struggle is, why are we making changes to that comp plan if we've sat down and I guess back up a little bit. That comp plan is what, a 10, or how far out is that comp plan vision?
So I want to say our current comp plan is the 2040 comp plan.
Okay. Okay.
It gets re-reviewed. I want to say it's every 10 years it's re-reviewed.
Gotcha. And what they're doing is trying to make
yeah.
sense. When they do a comp plan, just to be clear, I guess, to explain what a comp plan is, they lay out the entire county pretty much, right? And they say, hey, we've got clusters of residential here. There is somebody planning what the county's going to look like, or what the best use of the county resources are, and infrastructure and road maps and all of that stuff. There's somebody that says, hey, we've got a master plan for what we think overall our county is going to be. So we've got industrial here, commercial here, high density residential here, ag here, and try to lay that out so that there's not an intertwined mixture of, you got a farm here next to a high density residential right next to each other, whatever, right? So there's a overall game plan that is available to all the citizens to look at, say, hey, this is what the county is going to look like eventually,
It's currently being redeveloped right now. So it's actually
we're in the 10-year.
We're in the review process where the county has hired outside civil engineering firms that do specifically that for counties, to start looking at where our development has been going, and then try to develop further out as to what the best form of zoning would be outside of that.
So I guess look at that. So I had an understanding that, hey, every piece of property parcel is already committed to some type of zoning. So is that not necessarily the case? We zoned out a buffer around what is already built out, and now we're looking at further because we got growth going that direction. So we're going to now start rezoning or zoning.
So every piece of property has some type of zoning attached to it currently, based on what it is, because that's your current zoning, right?
Right. So every parcel is zoned one form or fashion right now. Gotcha.
Yeah, you have to, right?
So what they're looking at is rezoning.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. So they're looking for the future land use.
So taking a piece of parcel of property and rezoning it to something different.
Or maintaining the same.
Right. Gotcha.
Yep. So if you think about that, like, as population grows and you start seeing more of these collector roads and highways and stuff like that growing, stuff that might have been agricultural against those roads would probably be better suited for commercial, right?
Right, but and I guess I'll let you finish that thought, but just on the surface, me looking at it, it's like, are we letting growth dictate the county, or are we letting somebody plan the county to say, hey, this is the best use?
We know that growth is going to happen, and therefore they go ahead and direct where that growth should be happening at.
Yeah, it just seems like, though, if, like you said, if we've got a road, here, and now we built up this, and now, hey, this was ag, it was a big farm, but it's gonna lend itself better to be high dense residential, Well, that's a whole new ball game, because now high dense residential, I got to do all kinds of road construction. We got to build up the roads, everything else. And for me, why wasn't that included in the comp plan? And say, look, all high dense residential is going to be here. All commercial is going to be here.
Yeah, but when you do a development like that, this is the other thing that people don't understand at all, is when we're reviewing these and we're switching over to like a PDP for like a multifamily type use,
and PDP is
planned development project.
Okay.
Yep. So I guess we should talk about that first.
Right? Well, and this is a complicated thing, and that's why we're kind of parceling it together here, but there's a lot of things in play here, and to simplify it and say, hey, here's the comp plan. This is the way it's always going to be. We've got the roads in place. We know what the infrastructure is going to take to make it this. I think that's what the majority of citizens think, that, hey, we've got a comp plan. We've got everything planned out. The roads should be here, everything else. And then when we start,
more fluid than people realize.
Well, and I think that's what the issue is once we start getting in and changing this to this, and now we've got to do a huge road expansion and we got to take out a bond to redo this road. Like, why are we doing this? I'm just trying to, it's not as simple as everybody would think it is.
It's not.
And then on top of that, is it more complicated than it needs to be?
I don't think it's any less complicated than it can be.
Okay.
So when you start putting in property rates and how people want to develop stuff, like, we should be trying to preserve some type of agricultural land, right? Because at the end of the day, farmers aren't making a ton of money on their land as it is. So if a big developer comes in and says, hey, I'm going to give you $10 million to move out and go away, we just lost potential food production and stuff like that from the state. So there is initiatives going through the state right now to go ahead and preserve agricultural land as agricultural. And
yeah, but I mean, wouldn't that be what the comp plan is?
No.
I mean, this is agriculture. It's going to be agriculture. I don't care if that farmer moves out. Somebody may just move in and say, look, I want 120 acres just to sit on and with one house. I'm not going to farm it, but
to a degree, yes. But when you start seeing what it's buffered up against and stuff like that, it might not make sense to go ahead and leave that way, especially if
I think that's what a lot of the citizens have an issue with is they're seeing is like, we got this farm and the farmer's not farming anymore. The county's looking at, well, we can develop this. We'll put, high density residential in here. And they're like, well, why are we...
And let's go ahead and talk about that, though. The county's never looking at that and saying, oh, we can develop this. It's the private owner coming and saying, I want to develop this.
Well, yeah,
the county has no interest in developing.
He's wanting to develop that for monetary gain.
Yeah.
And whether it's the current owner of the farm saying, look, let's redevelop this damn thing so I can sell it off to a developer pre-done, or a developer buys his farm and then comes to you and says, hey, I want to sub this thing up and make it residential, a denser residential than it is right now. And I think that's where it gets complicated for the residents saying, and the whole growth issue comes into play. That why are we letting all these subdivisions come in here and do that? Because that's, we've got all this farmland, it's nice, everything else, and yeah, it may not be used for farms, but it's green spaces, and for a citizen, and they're looking at, hey, this guy bought this and now he wants to make this, he's doing it for financial gain, and it's not bringing a benefit to the county, or they're not seeing what benefit it would bring. And that's where you get, the crowded roads and overcrowded schools and, all the other stuff. And I got to, build a 6-lane highway here now.
I don't think that people realize that by having those developments come in, that's how most of the stuff's getting paid for.
Well, and I guess we need to dig into this. And honestly, this is kind of a fluid conversation. That's how I like having it. So it's not a bullet point conversation, and to be quite honest, this is probably how all the conversations are going to go, because I think there's a lot of nuances that go into this. But
so I want to talk about the different types of land use first.
Sure.
Let's
do that.
We have two different, I guess, types of zoning that you can say. You have Euclidean zoning, which is like your R1Cs, your R1As.
That's residential, right?
So it could be residential. It could be also C2 or C1.
Well, yeah, but nobody knows what all this stuff is. So that's why I'm just trying to clarify. So when you're throwing out numbers and letters.
Anything with an R, is residential typically. Yeah. Anything with a C would be commercial. The county's got a lot of like old type zonings that aren't really used a whole lot anymore too, that they basically... There wasn't a zoning plan here at one point in time, right? I want to say it was like late 70s, early 80s that our actual zoning plan was created, which is crazy to me.
Well, I just think the majority of it was farmland at that point. Right. I know, when we first got here, my mom's like, County Line was a dirt road.
Right.
There wasn't a whole lot here. You had Deltona that developed...
What they ended up doing when all that started happening is whatever that property was currently being used for, that's just what the zoning was at that point. Okay? It wasn't necessarily contiguous. It wasn't well planned or anything like that. It's just whatever you are, you are.
So that's what they were doing, and then we decided we're going to zone this. So then you've got complications because you've got a commercial property next to a residential property next to agricultural property because there was no zoning at one point.
Right.
Gotcha.
That's exactly what it was.
Okay, so that complicates things.
That does complicate things, but that's why people get upset when we start going ahead and saying, well, that whole area is this. We might as well just make it the same as the rest of the whole area.
Right. Gotcha.
Where you have these...
Trying to get some uniformity there.
Exactly. We're trying to go ahead and keep like things together.
Right.
So you have Euclidean zoning, which is whatever the name of the zoning is the associated values that go with it, right? So there's a zoning plan and actually breaks out what all these different zoning types are. They all have vested interests in those type of zonings. That's the actual properties that are put on that property, okay? You also have planned developments. So that's where these PDPs come in. That is our preferred method of doing things. Okay, so before I ever gave somebody just a straight up C2 use on, or C4 use even, so like you have intensities basically. So like a C1 is kind of like your general highway commercial type stuff. It's going to be your
retail shops.
It could be retail shops. It could be drive-through restaurants. It could be all kinds of stuff like that, right? Your C2 usage is where your like mini storage is going to come in. Your outdoor storage, some of those type of things. I think car washes fall under C2. And then like your C4s are like your heavy equipment commercial, to where it's like rock trucks and that type of commercial equipment is in and out of that property regularly.
Gotcha.
So
so just to clarify, so like you're saying rock trucks, and I'm thinking Florida Mine or whatever, that type of deal. But you're also mentioning the trucks going in and out. So is that also like a distribution center, like a Walmart distribution center or an Amazon distribution center? So anytime you got heavy trucks with lots of flow, that's
your higher intensity commercial. Gotcha. On the mining side, there's actually a mining zoning, so it's separate from all that. Gotcha. But if there's heavyweight trucks and there's frequent traffic on that type of scale, then it's a higher intensity commercial. Gotcha. So what we prefer to do is we'll do a planned development project, commercial. So just GC of general commercial or highway commercial. And then what we'll do is we can put stipulations and modifications to that zoning, right? So if it's a planned development commercial, we can say with specific C2 uses.
Okay.
So we can allow only certain things in the C2 category to be in that area,
so you
and
can
not
drive
give
how
them
that's developed.
Exactly, and not give them a blanket C2 usage for stuff we might not want in that area.
Right.
That's how a lot of the planned development projects work. Okay. Similarly, like an R1C lot. Okay, so a Euclidean zoned residential lot. This is how most of Royal Highlands is. Okay. They have setbacks that have to be met.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so there's in that zoning type, there's already broken out. You have this front setback, you have these side setbacks, you have this rear setback. What we'll do a lot of times for developments is we'll say, okay, it's going to be a planned development project, single family, and then let the developer go ahead and start modifying some of the lot sizes and make modifications to setbacks and stuff like that to make the plat of the actual project more contiguous.
Right, and we've seen that a little bit to where you'll keep on a planned development, you'll keep the original lot size on the outside and maybe condense a little bit on the inside because it's already surrounded by their stuff, so it's not going to affect anybody else. But what it does do is it affects the density of the residential, so there's more density.
So, and that's a method that they use to go ahead and obviously make the project more financially feasible for them. But when we increase our density, we also have green space requirements that go with the densities of projects. So if you're developing, 20 acres, there might be a 3.5 acre park requirement that you have to have in there. So they have to go ahead and factor those areas in somehow into their developments. And it's up to them on how they want to go ahead and do that.
Yeah, but I mean, and again, we're kind of strung out all over the place with this conversation, but I've seen where you've got a planned development and there's supposed to be a certain size buffer around that development, and there's a good frequency where the developer clears the entire thing and doesn't leave a buffer, and then doesn't go back and plant what he's supposed to plant along it.
Yeah. So okay. So we can get into performance bonds and maintenance bonds at that point, because that's what's supposed to go ahead and manage those. I believe this year was probably, it might have been last December or this March. There were two different workshops that happened. We have since gone ahead, because we noticed that was being a problem. We have changed the development ordinance to where now they have to go ahead and put their silt fence inside of whatever that tree buffer was.
Gotcha.
Right? So that there is a lot less likely chance of them demolishing into the trees lines and doing all that kind of stuff, right? So now silt fence and all their constraints have to be inside that buffer anyway.
Right.
Okay. It really comes down to the civil engineering company who manages the project.
Right.
Okay. But anyway, when they go ahead and develop these, they have bonds that they have to take out. And then in order for them to get that money released and actually get, final payments on stuff, they have to have basically approval by the county.
It's like a release of lien for...
Essentially, yeah. So, your performance bond might be, okay, you got to have 80% opacity on, your 35-foot buffer zone around the outside.
Right.
County come out and check. If it doesn't meet that and they don't want to go ahead and do it, or for whatever reason, the developer says, yeah, I'm not doing that, the county uses that money to go ahead and fix that buffer.
Right.
Okay.
So, and how's that changed recently? Because, like I said, we had some issues here. I don't know necessarily this year, but I know I was intently looking at one. I think it was last year, to where it was ongoing for quite some time, and I think you had commissioners taking field trips out there looking at it. You had all the business people looking at it. The residents were out there looking at it, and it was just it seemed like it was a long-term fight to try to get what was promised to them.
Mm-hmm.
So was that? That was all changed after that.
That's what started that whole process of our new requirements. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Because it wasn't one company, right? It started becoming more of a frequent thing that we were noticing, and then, like on our end, again, because we're sunshine law bound, even though I have the agenda 10 days beforehand, I'm not supposed to go out and look at the property.
Really?
Yeah. You're not allowed to use anything that doesn't happen in that meeting to make your decision.
Why wouldn't?
So if I go out and I look at something on property, I can't let that influence my decision during the actual process, because it's not evidence that everyone else gets to make their decision off of.
No, I kind of get that, I guess. But, to me, again, it gets back to just the inefficiency of government that, you would think that, hey, if I'm having a meeting about something, I've done this before where I've built huge buildings for personal use, corporate use, but we do site surveys. We do site inspections. When I'm going to buy a piece of property, we're looking at it to make sure that, I'm not looking at what the realtor's giving me.
Yeah, pre-application meetings and all kinds of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, you would think that, to be informed about it, whether you make a preconceived decision on it or not, at least you would have in your mind that the evidence that they're presenting during the meeting isn't factual or maybe not complete, and say, hey, look, I happen to go out to that site. Mm-hmm. I know for a fact there's a couple other things we need to look at. We're not making a decision on this until you bring back more information.
So I'm not saying that's not how things happen, right? So we had 2 months ago an application that came before us. I believe that application just got denied at the actual county commission meeting as well. That we were presented information, and one of our board members that were sitting up there says, I drive by this site every single day. That's not at all what you guys are doing. You guys are clearing all the trees right now.
Well, and that's why it doesn't make any sense to me, is because, at that point, there's no check and balance at that point. If you're not making a decision except the information they're bringing to you, they can bring you any information or leave out the information.
That's why it's important for the public to get out there. Because if the public comes up
Yeah,
and tells
but-
me, hey, by the way, they're cutting all these damn trees down, we can use that information.
But again, we're pushing it back to the citizens to be the ones dictating and controlling the what's right and what's wrong. Where you would think that, hey, not elected position, but I got people in a position that should be informed on this.
Yeah. It's called ex parte information.
Yeah, I just, I guess that's the part that I struggle with a little bit is I think, and I get sunshine laws and everything else, but you're relying on.
I hate it.
You're relying on somebody that's got a monetary gain at stake to getting this approved.
Yes.
And it's not a cheap process to get something approved and rezoned or anything else. And you got realtors involved. You've got, financial guys and everything else. And they're going to do everything they can to get this passed through, legally,
So I get calls every single week about, hey, you got this coming up as an application. I want to talk to you about it real quick. You can talk to me about it. I can't use any of the information that you're using or telling me unless you show up in the meeting and say it. So it's an ex parte communication. At the beginning of every meeting, we get polled to see who has had ex parte communication.
Right.
Every week I have to say, yes, I've had ex parte. Okay. The lawyer then goes ahead, because we have a lawyer that sits on this board with us. They're not a voting member of the board. They're just there to go ahead and advise. The lawyer goes in and says, you cannot go ahead and consider any of the information that you've heard outside of this chamber as part of your decision-making process.
Okay, so you can't use it, but can you refer to it saying, hey, I think I'm going to need this from you?
That would be using the information.
Well, no, you're not making a decision based on what somebody told you or something else. You're saying, look, I see all this, but I don't see this. Is there something is there something more you can give me? Knowing that somebody told you that there was.
So I've done that, right? So look, we live in this community. We're going to be bound to see some of these properties as we're driving by in our
I almost think
day-to-day.
it needs to be a requirement.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's a state statute, a county ordinance, or how you change that process. And that's really kind of why we're digging into all the stuff that we're digging into, is because I want to see for myself, where I think there's some deficiencies in the process, and then figure out what we got to do to change it.
I'd love to see sunshine law go away.
Well, again, we talked about this. I'm in favor of the sunshine law only because I don't want decisions being made behind closed doors, because I'm not necessarily concerned about conversations. I'm concerned about you have a complete meeting and decide something behind closed doors, and the public has no idea what the thought process behind it or anything pertaining to it, other than, hey, I got to tell you, we just made this decision and deal with it because that's what we decided, and there's no discussion that's out in the public on it. So that's the part of the sunshine law that I personally do not ever want to lose. I think there needs to be, hey, we talked about it. This is our thought process. This is why we're doing this, and then looking at it that way. I don't necessarily think that you guys should not be able to talk to each other, because you still have to put it out there that, hey, I'm voting this way. I'm voting this way in a sunshine format.
You had 2 county commissioners in Sumter County that just went to jail.
Went to jail for talking about a project
for
or whatever.
Sunshine law violation.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let me back that up. They went to jail because they lied about it.
Well, that's a whole different story. Yeah.
But, it started off as a sunshine law violation. And then when they said, nope, never had any communication outside these chambers, they went ahead and had all their phone records subpoenaed. And
Right.
Yeah,
Well, and that should have happened. I mean, if you're lying, you're lying. So, I mean, if you did it, you did it, and just say, look, yeah, we talked about this because this, and this. This doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So, all right. So not to go too far off the rails, you were going over the different classifications.
Yeah, so I just wanted to go ahead and put out there that the planned development project is a change to zoning, but it's a tool that we use to go ahead and tailor the zoning to the specific ask and make sure that we're not giving too broad of an allowance to people, right? So the other thing people don't, I think, realize all the time is that and this is why you start seeing all these developments pop up 10 years in the future, right? once we go ahead and we approve something, there's a vested approval to that parcel. It doesn't stay with the owner. It doesn't stay with whoever the applicant was. It stays with the property.
Well, and you got some companies that's what they do.
That's what they do. Yeah,
They
go
rezone
in.
stuff. They get it all done.
Yep.
It increases the value of the property, and then they can sell the property off
Right.
for 10 times what it was before it was rezoned.
Well, so look at 41. Okay, we got generally sleepy part of town out there, right? You got residential properties that butt right up to 41. Are you saying that shouldn't be a commercial property? Because the residential property is probably half the value of the commercial property.
Right, right.
But those are the type of rezonings we get. We had 2 of them last month.
Well, and again, does that get back to how old are those properties, and were they there before you guys started zoning?
It was all
Because
farmland.
41 was a dirt road as well.
Yeah.
I mean,
it was all farmland out
right,
there.
right.
So yeah, we're taking parcels that abut the main thoroughfare that goes through the entire state,
Right.
and
And I don't know that that's necessarily an issue on a circumstance like that, but when you've got
maybe in your opinion, but man, we get protesters all the time for stuff like that.
well, no, and I don't want to diminish the issue that would cause. I'm just saying,
Right.
if you've already got a whatever the hell that is now, 6-lane highway 41 right there, 4-lane or whatever, that's a high traffic area to begin with. So
You want to talk about 19? 19 north of 50?
yeah, right. So
That's all residential.
right. So every one of those parcels you'd have to change over to a commercial
Every
application.
single one of those has to come before us to go ahead and switch over to commercial.
Gotcha.
Because you can't go ahead and just one day wake up and say, by the way, we switched your zoning to commercial now.
Right.
It's people own it. They have to bring it before the board to go ahead and switch that zoning at that point.
Yeah, and we've seen a little bit of that, like on Mariner, where it's a little more mixed use. So you've got a
Right.
lot of residential on Mariner, and then you get like north of whatever that is, Spring Hill Columns, that Northcliffe Mariner intersection there, and you slowly start seeing that, hey, we're changing this lot from residential to commercial. And we're just kind of continuing that commercial down a
Right.
little bit. So
But on the zoning board, that's what we look at, right? We look at, okay, well, is this an outlier property way away from all the other commercial now that, yeah, it might eventually be commercial, but does it fit with the community?
right.
So, like, that's what our true job on that board really is this something that the community is showing a need for? Not necessarily showing a need for, because I gotta watch how I say that, because we don't need any more fucking storage units and car washes, but I can't tell people not to,
Right.
that kind of stuff. What I have been able to start doing on those is, and I'll take this as a win, we can go ahead and require the architectural standards for those storage units to actually match the surrounding buildings.
Right.
So it doesn't look like a big just, block storage unit like the U-Haul place over on Mariner and Northcliffe right over there.
Right.
That's the ugliest storage unit that we have in this county.
That was probably the first storage unit we had in the county.
I know. So now they've got to look more like office buildings.
Right,
from
which
the
they
road.
do. There, I think there's 150 right by the Suncoast there, and
Yep.
it just got went up a little while ago, and a couple other ones in the neighborhood. So
Yeah. So we can affect some of the architectural styles on that when it impacts the actual
Right.
main roadways like that. But yeah, I mean we look at a lot of the stuff we look at is more on the larger development side. It's not necessarily. I would say we're probably 40% commercial properties, and the rest is residential changes.
you're talking as far as what
actually comes before us.
comes before you, and you guys are making changes on. Gotcha. So I think we've kind of gone over what you guys are doing. Some of the cases that you guys see and how you make decisions based on, from one zone to the next zone and everything else, and a little bit on the comp plan, which is still a little fuzzy for me as far as not having a master plan on how we're building out the entire thing. But what I'd like to get into a little bit, I think, is directly talking about growth. right? So, and I think this is where we wanted some clarification on. Everybody's concerned about the growth, and the growth is just way too much. And there's, we're allowing everybody to come in here, and all these, big cat developers are coming in making a fortune on us, and the citizens are suffering because now the roads are clogged up, and the roads are horrible, and there's not enough room in the schools, and the teachers are underpaid, and what about impact fees, and why aren't we collecting enough to cover all the expenses? Instead, we're saying the county's paying more money and stuff like that. So I kind of want to dive into that just a little bit, as far as getting into what pays the bills, what doesn't pay the bill, why we are allowing so much development, and why we're not controlling that as much as what the citizens may think that we need to be doing. So on a residential side, if somebody buys a piece of property, you can't tell them that you can't build your house on that. That's why they bought the property. It's zoned residential. They're going to build. So every Spring Hill lot we've got that's an infill lot and everything else, it's a given that at any given time, they're going to build that up.
Yep.
They got every right to do that. Property owner rights. I bought it. I can build a house on it. Can't say anything about that. Can't stop it. We're not stopping any of that development.
Yep.
That's going to happen. If somebody's got a commercial piece of property that's already zoned something and it's already out there and they own it, you can't stop them from building a commercial thing as long as it fits within the guidelines and it fits in what it's zoned for already and it meets certain criteria.
And none of those come before our board.
Right. So none of that is on the planning and zoning. I mean, that's just normal day-to-day stuff. There's no control over that whatsoever.
County Commission doesn't see it. Planning and zoning doesn't see it.
Right, because it's normal business.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think where people struggle is when we get into these planned developments, right? And I know, like you said, a lot of people don't understand that some of the developments they see that being built right now, these were approved in the 80s. And so it was already approved, and you can't pull the approval back because people have made financial investments based on what that property is valued at, based on what it was designated as, right? So those approvals have to go through. You guys don't have a real choice on that. But that doesn't even come before you, because if it's already approved,
the master plan comes before us. So
because it's zoned, but it's not planned.
Right.
Gotcha. So you got to approve the plan just to make sure that, hey, we got the right buffer, we've got all this stuff. So you would have to do, hey, they're submitting a master plan, plotted master plan. This is what it's going to look like. These are the buffer zones. This is the access routes, everything like that.
Yeah, these are the lot sizes. This is how it coincides with everybody else. These are where the entrances are. We got a boulevard entrance instead of a single entrance. Like, I don't think people realize either. Excuse me. We've got restrictions now that say the longest road of your community has to be tree lined. It's like we've got all these type of just really granular restrictions on people. Like, I want to say if it's over a certain number of houses, you have to have a boulevard entrance where it's got two separate ins and outs. Right.
And you see that with, I think there's a new one on Powell, Valley Brook is going in there.
Okay.
Right? So that's right by the just before you get to the overpass on the expressway. So they do have a two entrance, and they got a big Valley Brook nice little sign.
A lot of it's fire restrictions and stuff like that. We want to make sure that there's ever an issue in one section of the road, you still have a way to get back to everybody else and evacuate the community. Right.
So you guys look at that and get in a granular level. This is okay, we got your layout, that's what you want, this is what we need aesthetically and functionally to go in here. Gotcha. So how much control do they have, because it's zoned for what it is, and then they do the master plan for that community. And we talked about it a little bit where, you guys try to have them maintain that, hey, we're going to maintain the normal lot size, at least on the perimeter, and then may have some variance on the interior that they can do, right?
Yeah.
Yep. So you may do a smaller lot size on the interior, but you've got to maintain what you got on the outside.
So In the past, previous county commissions were allowing as small as 40-foot lots.
Right.
The county commission has now gone ahead and put a minimum of a 50-foot lot. Our board tends to go ahead and push back on even the 50s and try to get to 60s. But yeah, basically what we do is we give minimum size requirements and then let the developer plat it the way they want to plat it. Usually what we're trying to do is if we don't have a huge buffer on the outsides, we want the outside lots to try to match up as close as possible.
Right. So when you're talking 40-foot lots, man, that to me, that's just like, that's way too dense, on the surface. But then you start thinking about it, and a 40-foot lot is what you need for a townhome, because you're putting, each one of those are individually owned and they're right next to each other, right?
We just approved a townhome section. I want to say they're 18-foot.
Right. So when people are talking lot sizes, it's not really a lot size. The entire building is, 14 units, and they're all tied together, but they're sold individually. So that's why the lot size may be diminished a little bit. Gotcha.
So what really comes into play on those is, especially when you're talking multifamily, you're really more worried about buffers between structures than you are, lot sizes and stuff like that.
So getting back to the density, right? So, from a citizen standpoint, just way too many people. We're allowing too much development, everything, and yeah, it's classified as whatever it is, but then they're going to do a planned development, but we don't have to allow them to fill that entire development in. So we have some say in, you need this much green space, you need this many lot sizes, you need a park, you need whatever you need to get that done, right? So we do have a say in that. So we could say, look, we're not doing dense lots. We're not doing, this, and you got to have a park here, and you've got to have I don't know what the standard buffer is, but an 80-foot buffer around the place to. Yeah,
it's almost never 80 foot. That's a big buffer. It's normally like 35.
Gotcha.
50 on like big commercial stuff where you're butting up to residential.
Right. So we have some say in how dense that density is in that thing.
Yes. So on the initial approval, okay. So like we were talking about, some of these developments that were approved previously, when you get that zoning approval, you get a density approval with that.
Gotcha. Okay.
So you get a number of units per acre.
So you may be tied to that already.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So if they were going to change that, though, that's what's going to be discussed in the meeting and say, hey,
then it's a re-review on, it's a modification to the plan development.
But they're just now submitting the plan development. So it's a modification to the density allowance.
So, yes, but it comes back in as a zoning review again. It's not a comp plan at that point.
I'm not trying to split hairs here. I'm just trying to understand the visibility of where a citizen would understand that, hey, not only are we trying to approve this master plan of this thing that was approved 20 years ago, but now they're coming back and they want to change the density of it as well.
Yeah. So there's different stages of plan, right? What a lot of people, especially local engineers in this area, do, because they're familiar with the process, they'll usually take their plan pretty far along to show us the first time.
Right.
Okay. If this is maybe a developer that doesn't want to put as much money out ahead of time, they're not as committed about building it right now, stuff like that, we'll get what's called a bubble plan. Okay. So a bubble plan is really just like a
conceptual.
It's a conceptual, but it's really just like a shaded area of, we're going to have residential over here, I'm going to have multifamily over here, I might have commercial like this front, and just kind of outlay how they want the property to kind of sit. We expect to have our retention areas in these corners and that type of stuff. We can approve zoning on a bubble plan. I don't prefer doing that, but it is an option sometimes. So what you see a lot with some of these older developments is that's kind of how they all were set up. And then where we're actually seeing the master plan is, okay, we actually platted it out. This is where the roadways are. This is how all that works together. what people need to understand about that too, though, is so we might be approving different zonings and densities and stuff like that, but it still has to get through permitting. Okay, so in order to get through permitting, it's still got to go through engineering review. It's still got to get a traffic study done. It's still got to have school concurrency done. It's got all these different prongs to actually be able to get permitted that might kill the project anyway, right? So if we get a master plan back and it says, hey, we're going to have our exit right here. We've got this many houses, whatever the case may be. And they go back and they get engineering review done. And the engineering department comes back and says, well, your entrance is too close to that entrance on the adjacent property that has built, since you've had your approval, but, they built first. You now need to move your entrance, 200 foot this way or add a decel lane or whatever the case may be. All that still comes into play even after they go ahead and submit their master plan. The other part, too, that you're asking about is like school stuff. There's a concurrency review that's done on every single plan development. So anytime you're taking one piece of property and you're making multiple houses out of it, the school board has a member, they're a non-voting member, that sits on our board.
Okay.
His name is James Lipsy. He's a school board staff member whose only job, well, the only job that I know of him to do, I'm sure he does other things, but
right.
The stuff that he does for our board is go ahead and say, hey, I checked that with this many houses, we're expecting this many students for this grade level, and this grade level. We have space in this school, we have space in this school, we don't have space in this school. The way concurrency works, though, is if they don't have space in a school, if they have space in an adjacent school, they'll go ahead and use the space for there. And the whole idea there is that the school board can always rezone districts. So if there is space in an adjacent school, the school board should be rezoning districts to go ahead and even kids out after everything gets built out.
Yeah, they should, but at the same time, and again, I'm not ready to dive into that just yet because, I mean, you see like going down Elgin or Powell right there where it's Challenger K8. You go there and whenever in the morning or in the afternoon, and
Explorer's even worse.
There are cars lined up for a mile on the side, and there's no turn lane for the majority of it. I mean, there's a huge turn lane there, but they surpass that. So
put your kid on the bus.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't know, and you would think that with all that development around there, because that's all master plan development is pretty much surround that school, that a lot of those kids would be walking and stuff like that. But anyway, getting back to let's get back to the residential side of it, right? Master plan, residential side. Yep. You're like, at one point you said, well, that's where revenue comes from, right? I've looked at the past two budgets that the county puts out, right? And before you get into the budget, the county administrator does his kind of foreword on, hey, this is our thought process, this is what we're doing, this is what we're looking at. Yep. In both of the last year's and the one that's proposed for this year, he has even stated in there that the amount of money that we get from residential growth does not cover the cost to provide the services to cover that residential growth. So from a citizen standpoint, you're looking at, why do we keep doing these master plan communities when they don't pay for themselves? They
don't entirely pay for themselves.
Right. So and doing some of the research I've done on this matter and stuff, and listen to the comments I got from some of the posts and some of the conversations I've had, I'm thinking, growth's hard, man. You got a ton of people, more people, but is it all the growth, or is it the effect of the growth that everybody has an issue with? So, if we were growing and the roads were great and, there was money to pay for the schools and there was money to pay for the hospitals and the fire stations and everything was great, I think people would mind the growth less because it's not really affecting them as much as it is, right? Yeah.
So just to interject on that, the hospitals,
Yeah,
are profit companies.
Yeah, I got that after I said that, but you get the point, right? So I don't necessarily know that it's the growth is the issue. I think it's how the county is handling the growth or not handling the growth effectively that's more of the issue. I think you can grow as long as you're doing it efficiently and it's paying for itself. But when you got the county administrator saying, "Look, residential growth costs us money. Every new residents that come in doesn't pay for what the services are going to need to cover that residence."
Mm-hmm.
So then we're like thinking, well, that's a lose-lose situation there. And then I guess my point is, again, you can't do anything about infill lots. That's going to happen. So that's a cost of doing business. That's what the county, that's baked in the cake basically. But you can do something on a plan development. Mm-hmm. And I guess you and I have had this conversation a couple times, and I don't fully understand it. But I think it's important because this is the one topic that it seems everybody's unified on is development and growth and how to manage this or how to slow it down. One of the two. We either got to manage it or we got to slow it down and cut it off.
Mm-hmm. Which is never a good thing for anybody.
Right. So, we talked about in the first session that we did that because of that growth, Hernando has gotten to a place where it is funding a lot of stuff is on, and you've got a third of our counties that can't support themselves, and I would love to see county be able to support itself and not be so reliant on the state. So, yeah, you need to have that growth to a certain extent to be able to pay for your basics, fire and water and sewer and police and everything else, and kind of be self-sufficient in that manner. But I guess on the citizen level, getting back to these plan developments and take the school side out of it, we won't even have that discussion on that. But the roads are horrendous. Every road in the county seems like it's jacked up, and for me, I'm thinking, hey, we got all these plan developments in here, they should be paying impact fees. Why aren't the impact fees repaving every road we got in Hernando County?
Because you cannot use impact fees to maintain. Impact fees are only for expansion. You cannot legally use an impact fee to repave a road. So you can use an impact fee to add a lane to a road.
So is that a state thing, or is that
it's a law? Not only that, you can only use impact fees in the district you collect them.
And I get that, yeah, because
that makes sense, right?
That makes sense because they're the ones affecting the.
So back that up, though. Do we have impact fees being collected in certain parts of the county? Like pretty much all the area from like County Line to Spring Hill Drive, all the way over to Mariner. That's all built out, right?
Yeah, it's all built out. So where's that funding come from?
Exactly.
Right. So I guess that would be something to put down on the list that, hey, maybe we need to look at how we can change that law.
It's coming from gas tax. That's where the maintenance comes from.
Right. And that's a whole other issue because we can tack on cents on gas tax and we take a certain percentage out of the gas tax, and that's a whole other thing. But so that's something that everybody.
Got a whole Senate referendum right now that would fix 80% of that.
Right, and me, I've never been informed or not informed, but in favor of these add-on taxes, right? So, I'm like, I don't think the government's using the money they got correctly. I'm not going to give more money to do it. Yeah. And then I started looking at some other counties and some other municipalities and how they're doing things, and it makes a lot of sense the way they're doing it. For me, there's just got to be safeguards in place that this money is going to be put to the best use because, it seems like you just keep giving government money and they keep,
The double-sided sword on that, right, or double-edged sword is you can lock yourself into a sales tax. That money can be used for the reasons that they go ahead and say it should be used for, but you don't have any protection to property taxes not being raised anyway.
Yeah, no, and that's you raise property taxes. You got the choice to elect or reelect or not. So I get that, but I guess getting back to these plan developments and the impact fees, and I'm sure that's something a lot of people don't understand. I know I didn't understand it, and I don't agree with it. That you would think you'd be able to put an impact fee and say, hey, if you're going to do this, you're going to help the county out, and you're going to repave this entire section that your thing's on. From here to here, we want this thing repaved.
That's great. It happens once, though.
What's that?
It's money that you just spent for one-time repaving.
No, I get that.
I think that's why they don't do the maintenance aspect of it.
Oh, right? No, I get. So take the maintenance aspect of it out and just have it as a project, I guess. But and I get you saying that, hey, what do you do the next year? Or the 10 years when it needs to be done again or whatever.
You should have some type of recurring.
Yeah. So there's got to be something there, but at the same time, you got citizens saying, we just put this huge development in. The road's shit to begin with, and they didn't do anything. They didn't contribute anything. And I guess maybe that's what to look at is, I don't know, like if you take a development that has come up, and again, the only one that comes to mind because I passed it this morning is that Valley Brook development. That's a smaller development there, but take any development you want and look at it and say, okay, this is what we're doing here. This is the impact fees we charged on this. This is where those impact fees went. Every dollar went here. Every dollar went here. Every dollar went here. And I don't know that anybody sees that. I mean, I'm sure it's available somewhere. I'm just saying, from a citizen saying that we've got all this development going on, developers are coming and making all this money. What's the county getting for it? I think that's something that would be valuable to say every time we have a development coming up, this is the money they're bringing in. And this is what we're doing. And is it adequate? Is that, and I don't know if it's different, the impact fee on commercial
$10,000 to $12,000 per house.
Is it, so is it different than a single family residential home and a thing versus a planned development, or is it all equal out, or?
Every house is a house.
No matter the lot size?
No matter the lot size.
So if we do some small lots for townhouses, those are still getting the
I don't
same.
know about the multifamily aspect. For single family, I know they're all hit the same.
Gotcha.
On the multifamily, I'm sure there's a different process for adjusting all that.
Gotcha. Okay. So,
but yes, a 5-acre parcel that has a house on it gets the same impact that a 40-foot lot has.
Right. So I guess getting back to saying that the school board does their little study on, how that's going to affect the schools. We can't use impact fees to do maintenance on roads. If we're charging an impact fee and we're not doing maintenance on the roads, and then I got the county commissioner saying, look, you're putting residential and it's not paying for itself. Is that impact fee adequate, or how can
they just raised it?
How can we get to the point to where if we do one of these developments, we know not only is it going to pay for itself, and the impact that it has, but it's going to also augment the community and make it better.
What do you mean?
So I want if somebody's going to do a development, I want not only to cover the cost of what it's going to incur as far as the schools and the additional people there and the fire and the police and everything that is going to have to happen to support that long term. I want the development to pay for that, but I also think if we're putting a development in, knowing that not only is it going to cover the cost, but it's also creating some additional traffic and things like that is just naturally occurring, that maybe there should be additional money that does something for the county to augment that. Like, you go to a lot of different places, and if I'm putting a development in, I'm also doing a revitalization of maybe a thoroughfare. Like, I've seen some where they say, look, you're going to put the development in, we want this whole median tree lined. And it's kind of maybe it's not an impact fee, but maybe we call it a community improvement tax on every development, saying, look, you're going to come in and do this. These are your impact fees. This is to cover you long term, but we're also going to put a tax on it of X amount of the project cost to put back in the community to help the community. And I think if you did that, they'd be a lot more welcomed and received.
So I think what you also got to keep in mind is, like, you're talking about basically paying in a tax into a fund, right? The county would use those
No,
funds.
not necessarily even a tax into a fund. I mean, we call it whatever you want to call it, but it would be an immediate deal. Hey, as you build this development, you're also going to do this. You're either going to, you know, and I guess the impact fee would form to reformulate some lanes and stuff like that to make sure that it was covered. And I guess you said that I think that the impact fee can be used for new construction or modification of
It's the only thing it can be used for.
right. So how far out from that development is that allowed to happen? Is it
In the district.
in the district? Okay.
Yep.
So anything that's got to happen for that, then they would be paying
I want
for.
to say there's 6 districts for impact.
Don't
It doesn't match up with the same districts that the county commission does, because they're development districts. They're not necessarily community districts for population. So I mean, you can look at all that. They have it broken out into different areas. I don't know who's responsible for that thought process or I'm sure we paid a couple $100,000 to some type of engineering firm to go ahead and do a study.
oh, fucking studies, yeah, Jesus.
I'm telling you, when I'm done with all the stuff I'm doing, I'm just opening up consulting firms
Just to do studies,
just
yeah.
for studies, because
Yeah.
it's just an opinion at the end of the day.
Right.
And you know what? 9 times out of 10, they're giving the opinion that the board actually asked for. Yeah.
You know, is that a crutch for a lot of stuff that goes on and say, hey, we don't want to make the decision. Let's hire somebody, have them say the same thing we're going to say.
It's a requirement.
Yeah. Well, I guess, maybe that's a check and balance thing. I don't know. But, so, I mean, is that a possibility then? I mean, is there any state statutes that would preclude us from being able to charge a developer a certain fee for doing something to reinvest back in the community?
You can't tax anybody for anything, man.
Because at that point, we're not saying they can't build on the property. You bought the property, you can build on it. You give us a master plan. This is a master plan. We're all good with all this stuff.
What if they phase it out at that point?
Phase what out?
Hey, I'm coming in. Yeah, this is my master plan to go ahead and build 400 houses over the next 15 years. I'm going to do phase 1. It's 23 houses. Put 2 trees in.
No, I think that it should be a buy-in immediately.
That's never going to work for a lot of developers, though.
Why?
Because financially, they're going to have to front so much cost. I mean, you're paying almost $1 million a mile for roadway,
Which is
right?
fucking crazy.
I know. It's insane. It's fucking tar and
gravel. I was listening to Jane Castor not too long ago, and she was going over some of the stuff that they do in the city of Tampa. Mm-hmm. And to this point, it was so ridiculous that they ended up just hiring their own staff on, bought the equipment, and they have their own staff from the city repaving roads every day. They do it at a fraction of the cost, a fraction of the time, and they're much more reactive. If something comes up, they can go ahead and take care of it. Yeah. And they do it all in-house just because it's just, you got to go through the whole process. It's a long process, and they tear up roads, and they're, taking up forever. And
think about that funding source, though.
What?
It's the city of Tampa that she runs.
Right.
It's a city tax on top of a county tax.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, of course the money's there to go ahead and be able to do all that kind of stuff. And you're saying it's cheaper than outsourcing and all that, but I don't know that our little county, we'd want that.
Well, no, and I'm not saying that's the way to go.
Right.
I'm just saying that, yeah, I mean, you're talking about the cost of how much it costs to do a mile of road or whatever,
Mm-hmm. It's $1 million for a stoplight.
Right. But at the same time, it's not $1 million I'm taking out of my fucking pocket to pay for it, because I'm not the one building the development. I didn't make the money on the development.
I agree.
We changed this, and there's always money, and developers, they try to get the whole thing developed with other people's money. That's the whole game in development. Mm-hmm. You want to use as little as your money as you possibly can to get this thing done and then cash out.
Yep.
So at the same time, you look at it that, from a citizen standpoint, if you want to do it, yeah, we'll deal with the growth side of it, but we're not going to deal with the growth side of it with the infrastructure that we've got and what we're currently sitting with. So if you want to do it and you want to make the money on it,
I mean, is the main infrastructure that you think people are caring about is just roadways?
no, no, I've heard a lot of different stuff with the infrastructure as far as not only the roadways, but also the policing side of it, the fire side of it, where we're building fire stations. I think we got 2 new fire stations going in. Is that correct? Something like that. And just how all that is being done. On my tax bill, I get a bill for fire on my property tax. Which is fine, and it's a service you need to have, and everybody needs to pay their fair share to. When the house burns down, we got a fire department that's going to come take care of it, whatever.
They just redid that whole study too.
If the residents see the development, but they're also seeing a direct benefit to them in some way, then it kind of offsets that a little bit.
What I would just go ahead and propose and just play devil's advocate here, okay? Say you stop development altogether, okay? Because everyone's all moratorium on development,
Right,
blah,
right.
blah, blah. Who's paying for all the shit that we gotta fix?
Yeah, but honestly, again, you get back to
No, because think about it. If you stop that, the things that are supposed to pay to fix all that stuff already should be your property taxes and gas tax.
absolutely.
It's got nothing to do with the development. Nothing. Yeah, it might get a little more congested in that area,
Right.
but a development going in Royal Highlands should not affect Spring Hill Drive,
Okay.
right? So if we're complaining that our buildings are falling apart, the fire stations need to keep on being redone, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, and
Maintenance on roads.
I wasn't trying to say that development is going to be the sole revenue source to pay for all that. I'm just saying that, hey, it'd be nice.
paying for beautification and stuff like that. I still. Okay, so we put in trees, and now the county still has to maintain trees.
No, I got you. I got you.
I think that it's a tough conversation to have, because without the development and without the generation of more property taxpayers at the new levels, to where they're not homesteaded properties that are only raising 3% a year, because that's the other problem. I mean, if you get people,
But they are, for a lot of it would be.
But my point is that they're buying in at the value that the current market is. So yeah, they're new homeowners that didn't buy their house at $110,000.
No, okay, gotcha,
They bought
gotcha,
their house at
gotcha.
$400,000. Their taxes are triple what other people's is.
Right, right.
That's helping contribute to the.
But isn't that what the administrator is saying? It does not cover the cost.
I don't know where those studies come from and how that's all factored out. I'm sure there's much more intelligent people than I am that deal with that kind of stuff. It is hard for me to wrap my head around that by adding 90 houses, it puts that much of a strain on a fire station.
No, and I would agree. Yeah, I mean, the fire station's there, but I mean, at the same time, we just added last calendar year in the budget, there was allocation, I think, made for 31 new employees, and a lot of those were fire employees.
Mm-hmm.
So all the growth that we're having did cost because we had to add a ton of
car
employees.
accidents and all kinds of stuff like that are happening. But you should talk to the county engineer too. Like, in our budget, it's insane how many people just run over stop signs and street signs all the time.
Right.
Like, if we just get people stop doing that, there's a huge chunk of money that would come back to the county.
Right.
But
and I guess those are things we never catch who did it, and they don't pay for it, and
got all these flock cameras around now. Maybe that's totally
so.
different.
Is that a county deal or is that a sheriff deal?
It's a sheriff deal. Yeah.
Okay. And man, I got so many questions surrounding the sheriff side of it and how that's all done, because there was a lot of feedback on that side of it. So we've gone really long on this, and again, I think there's going to be a much more in depth conversation. We'll continue this conversation, but originally I had this set up to where I thought we would meet with the commissioners first, get their view take on where they saw the community right now and where they saw the county, what direction they see the county going, what hurdles they've got, things like that, and then get into the government side of it and start meeting with the government officials. That's kind of where the planning would have came in. But to be totally transparent, and because it was such a glaring thing that growth and development is a huge part of the concerns of the citizens, that's kind of why I wanted to talk to you first. So, transparency, you being my son, didn't want to, say, hey, we're going to push him off with growth being the biggest thing. That's, we want to get out in front of that. So, I kind of wanted to go over that. It's given me a lot more things to think about, and we're by no means, done with this conversation whatsoever. I'm lucky I've got access to you a little bit more than most people. But
the biggest thing that I can say is, if somebody who's watching this to actually be able to go ahead and have a takeaway, it's a lot more complex and convoluted than people understand. Okay, the best thing for them to do is get involved.
Right.
Start actually paying attention. HernandoCounty.us/watch now. Bring it straight to that site that goes ahead, and all the videos are posted there. Typically the day after we film them, they actually go up, or you can watch it live on that same site. But get involved and actually see what's happening in your community.
Right.
Because until you start really paying attention to the nuances and stuff like that, one thing that we didn't cover was the difference in those color signs. Right? So
yeah.
You got the yellow signs, which are for our meetings. You got the blue signs, which are PIWs, so public information workshops. Those are the most important to go to.
The blue signs?
The blue signs.
Really? Okay.
Those are the most important to go to.
So that's the stuff that hasn't been decided yet.
That's the stuff where the developer says, hey, I got this idea that I want to go ahead and do this. I want to meet with the community and see what the community's input on how they want us to develop this and what they would be happy with.
Gotcha.
Before they bring it to us, because in our meetings we have citizens' comments. We have a section where you can come up and talk about a project that's in front of us and complain at that point.
Right.
And I say complain, but your input can be heard at that point. Most of the time it's in form of complaints. But those blue signs are important because that's where the developer can hear what your complaint's going to be, try to address that in their actual design and fix something for that. That's, maybe a compromise. It might not be fully the way that you want it, but it might at least be something comparable to a midpoint of where they want it to be and what the community around them is telling them they want.
Right.
And then they can bring that to us, and it's not us trying to make those decisions in the actual meeting.
Right.
So people see those blue signs and they think that, okay, well, a developer's going to get their way and do whatever they want. We're not going to be heard, whatever the case may be. But for people just to be able to get involved a little bit more, that's the only way we're going to change the education side of this.
Right.
So.
Gotcha. Well, no, I appreciate it. And, it's all good conversation. Like I said, it's kind of strung out in a couple different areas because it's a very complex issue that we're dealing with. And it's from what I'm gathering, it's probably the most important issue that we've got in the county at the moment is managing the growth that we've got in the county and kind of understanding, where the dollars flow and how they get there and everything else. So this is a conversation we'll have to keep continuing and have. We're going to dive in together on, commissioners and the county officials and all that, and we'll constantly be talking about this whole planning and zoning and development and growth and how to manage that and all the different aspects, because I think kind of get a overview of what your department does now with the Planning and Zoning Commission and how that's set up and everything else, and some of the things you're kind of constrained on. I think we need to dig in with some of the other members and figure out their viewpoints on it before we can come back and say, hey, this is really, if we want to not control growth, or control growth and manage growth and have it as a benefit to the community instead of a source of frustration and detriment to the community. This is the avenue we need to go down, and that's kind of the premise for what we're doing anyway. Is hey, we got to understand what we got here, understand the vehicle that it's done through, and then figure out how we can change it.
No, I'm excited for it.
All right, well, another great Hernando this week, and as we'll dig through this, and hopefully I'll get better at doing these conversations. But I'd rather it be a long form conversation, because things come up that I didn't think about, and things come up that trigger something that we can have further conversations on at a later time. I'm not trying to rush through this, and we'll get through it, and then we'll figure out where we make a difference, basically. So
sounds good.
I appreciate your time, man. Thanks.